Endeavour arrives at Botany Bay.
Captain Cook fires shots and a Gliagal man is injured, perhaps killed. Blood is shed before the colonisers even step foot on the land.
The first fleet arrives in Australia, landing at Botany Bay.
Containing 1,487 people, including 778 convicts. While some were petty thieves, many have been convicted of assault, murder and rape.
They set sail for Sydney Cove, now Circular Quay, where they laid the first foundations of the colony.
1,500 people claimed an entire continent already inhabited by as many as 3 million Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
A smallpox epidemic broke out in Sydney.
While the colonists had some immunity, local First Nations people did not.
It spread west faster than the colonisers, killing most of those infected.
One tribe was reduced to just 3 people.
James Roos becomes the first of many convicts to be given land. Land that was home to the Burra-Madigal people, a clan of the Darug, for 60,000 years. The Battle of Parramatta took place.
Led by Pumaway and a group of Bidjigal warriors, this was one of many battles of the frontier wars.
Pumaway was shot dead. His head was cut off and sent to Joseph Banks for his collection. The British Parliament abolished the Atlantic slave trade. It's not till 1833 that the Slavery Abolition Act is passed in Britain. Colonial businessman Benjamin Boyd shipped 65 men from New Caledonia and Vanuatu. This was the first recorded instance of sanctioned slavery in Australia. The Queensland government attempted to control the then widespread practice of blackbirding
through the Polynesian Labourers Act. This regulation was not enforced.
Aboriginal people from the Kimberley were kidnapped to work in pearling boats without wages. By the late 1890s, all mainland states and the Northern Territory introduced protection acts to regulate the lives of Indigenous people.
These included systemic wage and employment controls, restrictions of movement to and from reserves, and the forced removal of children from parents.
A select committee to the South Australian Parliament received testimony of widespread sexual slavery of Aboriginal women. Australia becomes a federation. The Constitution states that Aboriginal people will not be counted in the census, and the federal government has the power to make laws about any race except Aboriginal people, leaving that power in the hands of the states.
Australia's first Prime Minister, Edmund Barton, passed the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901, now known as the White Australia Policy, preventing the immigration of all non-European people. At least 7,500 Pacific Islanders brought to Queensland through blackbirding were deported. Lady Denman announces Australia's capital would be named Canberra. It's thought to be derived from the Ngunnawal word meaning meeting place. The Ngunnawal people were not invited to the naming ceremony.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attempt to enlist in the Australian Army despite their treatment by Australian society.
Most were rejected at first.
A military order states half-castes may be enlisted in the Australian Imperial Forces. Aboriginal soldiers were amongst those at Gallipoli. Through the 1920s and 1930s in the Northern Territory, many Aboriginal workers were paid only through rations. They died of starvation due to poor rations. The Chief Protector in the Northern Territory says Aboriginal pastoral workers are kept in a servitude that is nothing short of slavery. The first Commonwealth and State Conference for Native Welfare adopts assimilation as a national policy. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are permitted to enlist to fight in the Second World War, that paid only 1/3 of other Australian soldiers. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who served in the Defence Force returned to the same discriminations they left. Many were ejected from pubs and public places, even on successive Anzac days. Despite their sacrifice, they were rejected from schemes that offered jobs and lands to service people. Under the Nationality and Citizenship Act of 1948, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were granted Australian citizenship, but they could not vote. The Electoral Act amended that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people could register to vote, but voting was not compulsory. The Hawke government dismantles the White Australia policy, 65 years since it became law. A national referendum is held, and Australians vote to give the Commonwealth government the power to make laws for Aboriginal people. This is seen as a significant step forward for Aboriginal rights. This meant that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would be counted as part of the Australian population, and now the Commonwealth would be able to make laws for them, taking the powers away from the states. All states repealed the legislation that allowed them to remove Aboriginal children from their families. This is considered the end of the stolen generations. There are still First Nations people alive today who were servants or enslaved people. Neville Bonner is sworn in as the first Aboriginal Senator. The Aboriginal Tent Embassy is pitched outside Parliament House in Canberra to demonstrate for land rights.
Gough Whitlam pours red sand into Vincent Lingiari's hand, symbolising the legal transfer of Wave Hill Station back to the Gurindji people, the first Aboriginal community to have land returned to them by the Commonwealth Government.
The Commonwealth Government passes the Racial Discrimination Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, colour, descent, or national or ethnic origin. But they retain the rights to make laws based purely on race as per the Constitution. The Aboriginal Land Rights Act was passed, giving Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory the right to own land for the first time. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were required to register on the electoral roll, finally giving them full voting rights. Bob Hawke announces the formation of a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. The Royal Commission makes 339 recommendations. The Western Australian Government becomes the first state to issue an apology to First Nations people. All state and territory governments issue apologies by 2001. Prime Minister John Howard refuses to follow suit.
I didn't accept the conclusion of the Bringing Them Home report that genocide had been practiced against the Indigenous people. I didn't believe genocide had taken place, and I still don't.
2008, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd makes the first federal apology to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, particularly the stolen generations.
So let us turn this page together. Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, government and opposition, Commonwealth and state, and write this new chapter in our nation's story together.
As Prime Minister of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Government of Australia, I am sorry.
A crowd of more than 2,000 people gathered on the lawns outside Parliament for the history-making apology that come from all over the country, black and white.
All children in detention in the Northern Territory are Aboriginal. Aboriginal kids make up 20% of child deaths. 41% of the total number of kids in out-of-home care are First Nations, despite making up only 6% of the under-18 population. Data shows that the rate of suicide among Indigenous Australians are twice the rate of non-Indigenous Australians, accounting for 5% of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander deaths. 1 in 9 Indigenous babies are taken from their parents in Victoria. Aboriginal deaths in custody have reached a record high, totaling at least 540 First Nations deaths since the Royal Commission. Only 2/3 of the recommendations from the Royal Commission 30 years prior have been implemented. On October 14, Australia will vote on a referendum whether to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first people of Australia and establish a voice to Parliament so that they may better advise us on issues and laws that affect them. From as many as 3 million First Nations Australians at the time of colonisation, there are now less than 1 million who survive after nearly 250 years of state-sanctioned dispossession, segregation, slavery, incarceration, assimilation, starvation, genocide. Today, they make up just 3.8% of the total Australian population. It's widely reported on October 14, Australians will vote no. On October 15, a 13-year-old boy known only as Jack, who spent 45 days in solitary confinement earlier this year, will wake up to hear the news that Australia doesn't want to listen to his story. Our ears, as they always have been,
45 deaths now.
are closed.
How many more do they want the Aboriginal people to wait for? 45 deaths? Do they want another 45 before they listen to us and tell us that all our boys hung? Love hanging themselves.